And yes, we launched a Green Paper Friday. I'll just a little bit of background before I get to the results. Ramboll Smart Mobility is a division of 7 countries, and besides Finland, it's Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Germany and India and Singapore. And that's part of these are the countries that are part of our gender report. So as you said, we have a sustainability strategy, and the cornerstones of that is that we help provide access for all, ensure effective mobility for all, improving safety for all, and securing green mobility for all. So these are the cornerstones that we are working with within sustainable mobility. And as part of that work, as you mentioned, each year we produce a so-called green paper, a discussion paper, where we investigate and reflect on a topic within sustainable mobility. We have looked into Mars and worked with Mars Global on the WIMPACT paper. And last year we looked into how to make micromobility more sustainable. And as you mentioned, this year we looked into the topic of gender and mobility. And we did that in cooperation and with support from a number of partners that we are happy and proud to have with us in this project. It's the Ramboll Foundation, it's HSL from Helsinki, it's Region Stockholm, it's VBB in Berlin, and Trafikverket in Sweden. And we work together on this paper that we launched Friday. And what we did here was look into gender differences in the 7 countries that are part of smart mobility. And especially we looked into the capitals of these countries to have something that actually could be compared. That was the word I was looking for. The study consists of 4 elements. A desk study of the international research that has already been done. We have interviewed experts, 11 in total, and also a Finnish one, of course. We have collected existing data in all the countries and looked into those. And then we have done focus group interviews with 40 women in these 7 capitals. So basically to start with the international research, that it is by many assumed that transport and mobility is gender neutral, but it actually isn't. According to the International Transport Forum, gender is actually one of the most robust determinants of transport choices. So that's why it's incredibly important to look into that. But actually, it isn't done to a great extent almost anywhere, and very few projects really systematically looks into the topic and the impacts it has on men and women. But the international research shows that there are these gender differences. And in overview, it is like this. And when I say men and women here, it does not mean that all women do this or all men do the other thing. It is just a reflection of what is shown in the data. So that's what we are looking into here. And in the data, we can see that women walk more than men, women use public transport more than men, women drive less than men and are often passengers in cars, and women will do like to bike, but only if there's safe infrastructure available. On the other hand, with men drive more, bike more, and use new mobility services like car sharing or ride sharing or micromobility services to a great extent than women. When it comes to trip types, there are also some differences. Women, to a much greater extent than men, have shorter distances, But women also have a different pattern where women tend to trip chain much more. And that means having multiple stops during a trip, whereas men typically have a more A to B direct pattern. And whereas women often accompany children, do grocery shopping, or accompany other family members, men to a great extent than women travel individually and independently. When it comes to the experience, there are also some differences. Women, to a much greater extent than men, think about which route to take, especially during nighttime, because women, to a much greater extent than men, worry about assault and harassment related to traveling alone at night, for instance. All these differences, of course, is not something that we planned for, but it's a result of some structural differences that we still have in our societies. For instance, the fact that women's work participation in labor work is lower than men, that women to a great extent than men work part-time, and that women in general earn less than men. We still have a gender pay gap. And then in general, women have the majority of the parental leave. And that actually is a key to some of the patterns we see where women tend to travel more with children and do grocery shopping. Some of these norms are formed during, for instance, parental leave. And we asked 11 experts about why is this and what are the challenges that we are facing in transport and mobility related to this. And they all, across these 7 countries, say that there are these historical and cultural and structural gender differences, and that it influences patterns and mode choices, that there is a gender data gap in the transport sector. We simply not always collect gender segregated data, but one of the bigger problems is that when we do, we don't analyze it in a way that actually takes gender into account. We don't systematically analyze and look into how different projects affects men and women's transport patterns, or look into the reasons behind these differences and patterns. So basically, we have a transport system that is to a great extent designed for the average man, and that of course is a problem because women take up half the population. And so there are some challenges that the women face every day in transport and mobility. So we had also the pleasure of talking to a Finnish expert, Mr. Tiina Manistofunk. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. She has studied history and also environmental issues and gender roles in urban mobility. And in the report, we have an article based on an interview with her. And she has some very interesting points, also from a historical perspective. But one of her points is that since the 50s and 60s in Finland, like in anywhere else, making sure that we can drive cars in our cities and everywhere is something that has framed or defined how we look into transport, about the efficiency of the car, and that has meant that other modes have not to the same extent been prioritized. And since car driving is very a male-dominated mode, that has been prioritized, and that has meant that other modes have been kind of neglected. And also she says that we need much more to not only look at the data for how people travel, we need also to look into the why and get behind these differences and choices. and also figure out how we can cater for those in a much better way. And we need to do so because the way women travel are, you would say, sustainable modes, and we need much more than we do now to prioritize these modes. In the data collection, we collected existing data, and then we had a big survey. We surveyed 500 people in the 7 capitals, and we asked about mode choices in an average month, trip purposes, but the core of the survey was to survey men and women's different associations to different modes, and have them identify the main challenges and concerns that they face when traveling. And we also surveyed the use of digital solutions and men and women's attitudes towards these digital services. In Finland, the survey area was Helsinki and Vantaa and Espoo, and in Helsinki we surveyed 506 men and women. And like the international research, we also see in our report that women walk more than men. And in these slides here, you can see the global results in the infographics. And then I just added some local numbers to just see the differences and similarities from Helsinki. Walking is mostly women, but there are many similarities when it comes to the associations. It's primarily active and cheap that is by both men and women associated with walking. But also more women than men in Helsinki associate corona safe with walking. And it's more women than men that associate active and also comfortable. But one of the differences is that then men, to a greater extent than women, associate walking with slow. 67% more women than men identify traveling with groceries and bags as a challenge when walking. And actually 122% more women than men identify personal safety as a challenge and concern in Helsinki when walking. So that's really significant. When it comes to cycling, we see also in the global data that men cycle more than women. There are similar associations here, both active and cheap and sustainable. But also we see that in general, in the global results, men rate themselves more experienced cyclists, except in Helsinki. That's the only of the 7 capitals where that's the case. We also here, we see that corona safe is more associated with cycling with women and also more women than men when it comes to cheap. And again, here with cycling, more women than men identify traveling with groceries and bags as a challenge, and 85% more women than men identify traffic safety as a challenge and concern in Helsinki. And that is something that we see also in the international research, where it is said that women are in general more averse to risk than men in general in life. But when it comes to cycling, that is then shown in that women will not bike if the infrastructure is not safe. We're kind of smart that way, but you could also see it here that a lot of women associate traffic safety or see traffic safety as a challenge and a concern. For public transport across the modes, we looked into bus and local train, tram and metro, and we can see that this survey was done in December 2020. So corona is, of course, you could say top of mind because it is something that is top of mind in everything we do. But when it comes to public transport, women to a much greater extent than men associate corona with public transport, and that is across the modes. It's a little less actually for metro than for some of the other modes. But also when it comes to the challenges and concerns, Corona is mentioned, but again, we have personal safety and fear of harassment and assault. That is 180% more for metro and 120% for local train and 54% for bus. So that's really a significant difference in that concern. And looking, when asking specifically what influences choice of public transport in Helsinki, we see that that feeling of personal security on board and at the station is something that women really identify in the survey. Car driving, we also see that men drive more than women in our survey, and that women to a great extent are passengers. And we see similar associations. It's about the car being comfortable and fast, but also for women identifying that as corona safe. So we have 80% more women saying that. And then again, women also identify the car as kind of a secure space when it comes to personal safety. So again, that is something that women have really top of mind when thinking about transport and mobility. But in general, it's parking, price, and CO2 that is the primary concern and challenge identified related to car driving. And we see across the 7 countries that women, to a much greater extent than men, identify the fact that the car has CO2 emissions and women identify that more as a challenge than men. The share is a little lower in Helsinki than in some of the other capitals. I think it's in Stockholm where it's more than 100% women than men. So, but in general, women are more kind of aware or are thinking about that the car is unsustainable. New mobility services, again, when it comes to e-scooters across everything, it's identified as traffic unsafe. That's the main association. On the traffic unsafe and unsecure is both for men and women the absolute association that people have, and women a little bit more than men. With car sharing, that's associated with sustainability and more by women than by men. And for ride sharing, again, corona is the main concern. And in general, we see that new mobility services are used more by men than women. Bike sharing is the kind of the service that is most gender equal, and actually in Helsinki, more women than men use bike sharing, and that's the only capital that we surveyed where that is the case. We also see across that women use digital solutions more than men, especially when it comes to route planning apps and travel planning apps, probably related to the fact that the women use public transport more than men. And in general, women find that technology makes traveling easier, probably related to the trip training and public transport. Then digital solutions simply makes it easier. And it is seen in some other reports that it is said that the reason for women not using new mobility services is that women adopt slower to technology. In our survey here, it seems that that's not the reason why. It's more related to if the services actually don't fit women's needs. So it's not as much technology that kind of are putting women off. It's probably more the fact that the services that are being offered probably not always fit women's needs. So we also see that in the focus group interviews. We see across the 7 capitals that women talk about, they have the exact same strategies when walking and using public transport at night. And we actually write it's a coincidence, and of course it's a horrible background that because of the woman in London, now in many countries women are actually starting to speak out about this, because this is not something that anybody talks about. But we can just see also in the focus group interviews that it's the same strategies, thinking about the route, which shoes to wear so you can run, having keys in between your fingers. There's so many strategies, and it comes across in all the different capitals. So basically, safety and security, a very big issue for women that we need to really acknowledge as a challenge and a problem, and start incorporating that in planning, but also without kind of victimizing women, but just acknowledging this as a concern, and just have that as part as our planning. But also, again, prioritizing basic infrastructure for walking and cycling, and making sure we have good public transport that can serve the needs, and making it accessible also when traveling with groceries, bags, or accompanying children or other family members. So much more recommendations in the report, but instead of going through them, I will encourage you to look into the report. It's on the Ramboll Smart Mobility website. And thank you.